Kennst du das Land, wo die Zitronen blühen? Do you know the land where the lemon trees bloom? By 1786, Johann Wolfgang Goethe had been working for 10 years as an administrator at the court of Weimar. An unusual career decision, you might think, for the poet and dramatist who would later be seen as the driving force of the Romantic movement. Roads, mines, financial matters. You might as well have made William Wordsworth head of the tax office. This life was stifling for Goethe, and his poetry suffered. It lost its vitality, its colour, its connection with the wider world. It became self-conscious and developed a rhythmic regularity. It was all too much for Goethe, and one night at 3 a.m. in the morning, without anyone knowing, he fled for Italy, a country he had yearned to see for many years, and one he had only ever glimpsed from a distant mountain top. The land of lemons. In Lemon, I describe how much the same thing has happened to advertising, how in the last 15 years there's been a change in aesthetic style, one that's moved towards flatness and abstraction, one where we don't see whole people, or if we do, they're used as props rather than as people interacting with each other. We see bits of people, so we see their hands, or we might see their lips. Advertising has become abstracted from its time and place as well. It's rather dislocated, so we don't know in many ads where it is set. The sense of lived time has gone. We also see words on the screen. It's as if the visuals are only really there to support what the words are trying to tell us. And everything has become increasingly rhythmic. What we've lost is that sense of depth and betweenness that used to be present in advertising from 20 or 30 years ago, where you might actually see a real place. You might actually see depth. You might see people interacting with each other, perhaps set in the past. There might be accents or intonation, gestures, things that show us that these people are really living and interacting with each other. This sense of depth, betweenness and humanity has disappeared. So why has this happened? Well, in Lemon, I take as my starting point the brilliant work of scientist Ian McGilchrist. He's perhaps the world's foremost expert on brain lateralization. Now, since the 1960s, we've thought that perhaps the left brain and the right brain might do different things. But Ian McGilchrist reframes the question and actually says it's not that they do different things, it's that they do things differently. They have different takes on the world, different priorities, different things interest them. And perhaps the clue might lie in their structure. So the left brain prefers to pass information within localized brain region, whereas the right brain has much greater overlap, dendritic overlap or branching. It also has more myelin, that's the white matter, and that conducts things more quickly than the grey matter. So it's more associative in its structure and its ability to pass information around. The myelin also is more sensitive to certain hormones and certain drugs than the grey matter. So structurally, the two brains are quite different. They're different not just in people, but they're different in mammals, they're different even in birds. So let's take birds for a moment, because that's quite helpful to demonstrate a few principles. In birds, the left-hand side of the brain, controlling the right-hand side of the body, is responsible for very narrow and goal-focused attention. It's what you see in action when the bird is pecking around on the ground trying to isolate grains of food, abstract them from their context, categorize them, identify them. The right brain, all the while, which controls the left-hand side of the body, is broad and vigilant in its attention, always looking around it, alert to threats and to novelty. It's what stops the bird from becoming someone else's lunch. So these two halves of the brain have very different ways of paying attention to the world. So the left brain is rather narrow and goal-orientated in its attention. It likes to abstract things from their context, break things down into smaller parts. It likes to categorize things and people. It likes things to be explicit. so no room for nuance or ambiguity. It likes things to be linear in terms of their cause and effect, to be familiar and repeatable, to be rather literal and factual. Things are either true or they're false. And it's rather self-absorbed and dogmatic, with an unfounded sense of optimism. The left brain likes tools and things with which it can manipulate the world. Principal of these are language, signs and symbols. And it can't really understand music or appreciate it. It can only really understand very basic rhythm. The other centre of consciousness, the right brain, is broad and vigilant in its attention. It sees the world as it really is, everything in context. It sees the whole. And if the left brain's interested in things, the right brain understands people. It's what helps us to understand the gestures, intonations, expressions, knowing glances of people around us. Their accents helps us to pinpoint them. In fact, it sees the whole world as a set of connections and relationships. It's open to novelty and contradiction, and it can well believe that two opposing thoughts could both be true at the same time, which means it understands metaphor and it understands and appreciates humour. It's self-aware and questioning of its time and place in the world, and it's what gives us our sense of lived time, space and depth. And it's what enables us to appreciate and understand music. Music is the oral equivalent of visual depth, harmony, texture, timbre and so on. The two hemispheres are connected in the middle by a bundle of fibres called the corpus callosum. And this bundle of fibres, as well as bridging the two brains, it turns out its primary purpose is to inhibit one brain or the other at any given time. And the left brain has a greater suppressive effect on the right than the right does on the left. So in individuals and certain times in history, we see this kind of left brain drift towards a very linear thinking style. A narrow and goal-orientated attention is brought to bear on the world. And we see people adopt entrenched positions. Things are either right or they're wrong. They're either truths or lies. Anger also lateralizes to the left brain. So society becomes rather brittle. The same thing has happened before in history, when we move from the Renaissance to the Reformation. In the Renaissance, we saw depth emerge for the first time in art for 1,000 years. Different planes of depths, as can be seen in this painting here. Look also at the movement, the flow of the characters behind. Look at the way that it references other things. It's got a very clear sense of its time and place in the world, so you see architecture from antiquity behind. Notice also the sense of depth and empathy on the characters' faces in the foreground. The characters on the right, the shepherds, are actually referencing a painting from 10 years before by Van der Goes. And in another knowing reference, the artist himself is the shepherd at the front pointing to Christ. So we have depth, we have empathy, we have movement and flow, we have referencing of other things. We have a very clear sense of one's time and place in the world. Compare and contrast that to paintings from the Reformation, such as this one here on the left. The Reformation has many of the hallmarks of today's world. It was a time when people stripped back the characters, the metaphor, the sounds and smells of the church, and looked for the authentic. In so doing, they lost the authentic. They lost everything that made the world human. So in these paintings of the time, you'll notice the way that people are no longer standing freely looking towards the altar, but are regimented in pews behind, facing the pulpit from where the Word of God is proclaimed. And the Word of God takes on particular importance in this period. In the paintings of the time, it's as if the imagery is only really there to serve what the words are telling us to do and think. You'll also notice the sense of abstraction, the bits of things, bits of different scenes in the background. And of course, this sense of control and power that comes with the left brain too. And that's the large characters are the big and important ones, and the small characters are less important. And that's what we've seen over the last 15 or 20 years. And it's had its effect too on advertising. Features in advertising that play to the right brain have been fast disappearing. So characters with agency, dialogue, a play on words, implicit and unspoken communication, a scene unfolding with progression, music, reference to other cultural works, distinctive accents, things that are set in the past. These things are extremely effective at driving an emotional response and therefore helping you to build your brand and market share gain over periods. These are the things that have been disappearing, whilst all the while abstraction, unilateral communication in the form of monologue or perhaps voiceover have been increasing. Rhythmic soundtracks, flatness, all of these things are unlikely to attract and sustain attention and to elicit an emotional response. All of this explains the crisis in creativity, as Peter Field has shown. Different data sets all pointing to the same time period that it's happened in and in the same direction. If these principles are important on television, they're imperative online. Of the 5 types of attention that psychologists broadly agree on, 4 of them are dealt with principally by the right brain. If we want to attract people's attention and sustain it, then we need to think about things that will appeal to the right brain. And that means principally the living, characters, creatures, monsters, animals, the living. Or perhaps failing that, you could try something a little out of the ordinary. Look at these 2 ads for a moment. Defocus a little. Which one is your eye drawn to? Which one do you want to look at? The chances are that you're drawn to the ad on the right. It shows the real world with people and animals, facial expressions, a sense of betweenness, connection, something out of the ordinary. These aren't real gorillas after all. The one on the left is flatter, more abstract, a word pulsating to a rhythmic soundtrack before exploding into 1,000 abstractions. There's no sense of a real world. There is a focus on things. This is 15 seconds long, and the ad on the right 70 seconds, and you will no doubt have thought that the ad on the left is better suited to digital, though both are digital ads. Let's look at how they perform. First, on attention. The ad on the right attracts and sustains attention better. It also creates a stronger brand impression. The ad on the right also elicits a much stronger emotional response and sustains that emotional response throughout. Its cumulative brand recognition is also quicker to build and stronger overall. Emotion and attention go hand in hand. For companies wanting to build brands online, it's imperative to conceive your work for the right brain. Relevance isn't enough. You need to entertain. In many ways, Lemon is more pertinent now in the era of a pandemic than when I wrote it. Each of us has stepped back from the world, and when you step back from the world, you get a broader perspective on it. In our isolation, we feel more connected, strangely perhaps, with the people around us and the world around us. We have witnessed something of a right brain reset. How long it will last, it's difficult to tell. But we've seen acts of spontaneity, people clapping in the street, singing from balconies, dressing up in costume. We have seen acts of altruism, of course, and generosity. Each of these things are things of the right brain. And we've also seen a desire to look back. We see it in media consumption data, listening to old music, reading old classics, a sense of nostalgia perhaps. It would be odd if some of these things didn't find their way back into advertising. Certainly in this period we've seen advertising change quite a lot. The question that we get from many people is, does advertising need to be different in light of this change, this shift in the way we're attending to the world? Well, to answer this question, early on in the pandemic, we retested 100 ads that had first aired in January and February of this year to see in late March whether they were connecting exactly the same way. And the answer came back that they were, by and large, connecting just as well as they had before. So there's very good reason for advertisers to continue with their pre-existing campaigns, and in fact should really, in many cases, to refresh and replenish those neural networks to keep brands salient. What we also found was something interesting at the fringes, and that was that certain ads were connecting slightly better and certain ads slightly worse. And the types of ads that were connecting slightly better were ads that were more right-brained in their nature. So they focused on characters, on fluent devices, on betweenness, on connection. They looked at things through a historical lens. They perhaps focused on local place and community. These things are more likely to connect during times like this. The sorts of advertising that didn't connect as well was more mechanistic, more left-brained. So it focused on things rather than people, that it looked at things in terms of control and precision and performance. And advertising that used rhythm or words predominantly, things of the left brain not connecting quite so well. So what about the new work that's being made in the pandemic? Well, COVID-19 tactical response advertising, and we've seen quite a lot of this in recent weeks and months, is also something we've been examining. And we found that work that shows life, that shows how brands are enabling life to continue and enriching life, that kind of work is connecting very well. You see it particularly in food retailers, you see it also in telecommunications companies. The sorts of work that isn't performing well normally shows empty streets, or it tells people what to do, what to think, what not to do. It sort of feels like it's preventing life in some way. And in the COVID-19 work that we've seen a lack of distinctiveness. So what brands ought to be doing in this period is what each of us, I think, is trying to do. And that's that each of us in times of hardship like to remain maximally individual whilst being maximally connected. Goethe wrote little by way of lyric poetry during his 2-year stay in Italy. It wasn't until he returned to normal life that he struck out in a new creative direction. And perhaps that will be the legacy of this pandemic on advertising too. We don't know what effect it will have on creative style until perhaps we're all back together again. But what we do know is where we should be going and the path we need to take to get there. As Goethe might have put it, Dahin, dahin geht unser Weg. O Vater, lass uns ziehen. 'Tis there that our path leads. O Father, let us go.